One of the greatest stage illusions, at least for audiences astounded and amazed, is levitation. Be it a floating lady or a magician who appears to levitate above the ground, but nobody ever says that he is flying. Why? It has to do with aerodynamic principles. First, it is just a stage illusion, if you were not yet aware. And what you see has nothing to do with thrust or drag or lift like you would encounter with the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk attaining flight. And similarly, majestic hot air balloons, like you might want to use on a getaway wedding, do not fly technically, and most kids tend to understand this basic science about how the hot air balloon is made to float, granting the ability of something heavier than air to defy the gravitational forces that would usually hold it down. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for Arlington Public School Board. Very often, especially in a community with more government scientists than anywhere in the nation, you hear an explanation about anything in the current public health crisis. They will reflexively respond to you almost dogmatically that they use the science. Closing schools was because of the science, even if it seems like a drastic measure that might be achieved with less inequitable results if a better understanding of risks to manage had been applied. Alternate work schedules have been used for years in the federal government to reduce flows, especially in pandemic situations or epidemic situations, and who does not want an extended weekend? Another similar idea in terms of reducing flows to achieve social distance and other goals. Such proposals have been offered for years in contingency planning for a pandemic health crisis or epidemic health crisis, but most chose the ones that impose the greatest social and economic harms to address in this pandemic, a risk that did not seem proportional to the cost of preventing it. And so for the next few moments, we're going to examine that other side, the risk. A novel coronavirus from a new perspective, focusing primarily on its genome size, as size matters, as the largest of all families of viruses. And what a scientist would expect, just at the sheer massive size to affect how it interacts with its environment, even posing limitations and restraints upon exactly how transmissible and virulent it could be to mankind, and raising questions as to how it might have become a pandemic pathogen at all today, having been attributed to over 11,000 fatalities in the Commonwealth of Virginia alone, or a little under 4 9/11 tragedies, with most of the fatalities, the elderly, a known risk from the very beginning. The largest coronavirus measures just a little over 1 micron and is only 6 times smaller than the smallest active component in tear gas, a riot agent often employed by law enforcement. 1 micron, 350 of which could actually fit in a period on a standard sheet of paper, according to the National Academy of Sciences. And by function of gravity, were it just 100 times larger, even after a sneeze or a cough, that novel coronavirus would fall straight to the floor by operation of Newtonian physics and his laws of gravity. Too heavy and too large in genome mass to do much more. So big, it has to fail. And this raises the question in terms of how something could be too big not to fall. And this size makes it actually the most unstable of viruses. So unstable, in fact, that it might actually just fall apart under its own weight, kind of like a sheep without a shepherd would simply fall over, weighed down by its woolly coat. And scientists have determined that because of this threat to its own existence over thousands, maybe even millions of years of evolutionary pressure through natural selection, these large genomes that are suspected to have been mutant genomes in complex humans, mammals, and birds that developed invasive mutations and were expelled from their bodies, causing harm someplace else where they might take hold, a weaker species, and were expelled to develop a stabilization zone along the core that restricted any mutations only to the polar ends, keeping the core intact and immutable, and allowing it to sustain itself as infections in other beings. But to cause an upper respiratory tract infection, that large genome actually has to develop a way to fly or float or levitate or to overcome the natural force of gravity just to reach its target in your nose or mouth. And so the question for a scientist would be exactly how a novel coronavirus could do this to transmit and spread the disease. And probably since the beginning of the current public health crisis, you have probably become familiar with the droplet theory of disease transmission. Medium to large droplets that are expelled from the mouth and nose in exhalation events, like coughing, sneezing, talking, or even singing, that permit up to 4,000 droplets to travel through the air, and in a sneeze at velocities up to 200 miles per hour to land in the target's mouth or nose and to cause an infection in someone else. But if it misses its target, it will fall on the ground or any other surface, and this novel coronavirus has been found to remain viable for as long as 11 days, still able to infect someone else, but it cannot replicate. It needs a host, a living host. But as of April 6, 2021, the CDC has determined that coronavirus just laying in wait on a bar stool or door handle, a window or table poses probably no threat at all to you. But they have not told you exactly why. And this may have left you with a little bit of apprehension, at least. Maybe reconsidering that vaccine, a little on edge, just about the fear of the unknown. What if the scientists aren't saying something, you might be asking? What if they're wrong, you might be asking? Fear and uncertainty is a natural thing for most folks, especially when confronting the unknown. But back in July and August of last year, Lindsay Seymour, an environmental engineer at Virginia Tech, joined with 238 other scientists to recommend rejecting the droplet theory of transmission, kind of like a cannonball guy being tossed into a net at a circus, because it was their view, as Professor Marr told the New York Times, it is in the air. Well, perhaps he was just trying to make it easier to understand for people that don't understand science, because unlike Ralph Northam's God, a novel coronavirus is not exactly everywhere. Not even the term pandemic means to a clinician that a novel coronavirus is a boogeyman under every bed. But as Ralph Northam had tried to explain at his pre-labor COVID-19 update to Virginians, what Professor Marr and her colleagues had been proposing is that rather than heavier than air droplets being expelled from our noses and mouths, there were smaller particles that were being expelled, but of such a smaller size, less than 5 microns, what is called the computational fluid dynamics, or wind vectors and currents in any given space, outdoors or indoors, might alter the balance of the equation to the advantage of a small particle to enable it to remain suspended for up to 2 hours or more. Imagine an invisible enemy that could remain in the air, unseen, lurking, even after an infected person is gone. It should come as no surprise to any germaphobe that there are germs in the air. But the important distinction is between harmful germs, or viruses and bacteria, and those that pose no threat at all, harmless. And for bacteria, much larger forms of life than most viruses, the sheer size makes them incapable regularly to present a threat of being an aerosol transmission risk, because it requires only the successful transfer of just 10 bacilli, in the case of tuberculosis, to enter into the lower respiratory tract of the lungs to cause an infection. Bacteria that require a higher infectious dose present no problems at all, because they will not have those conditions present to their advantage. The bacteria that causes tuberculosis may be as small as 1 micron, or the size of the largest presentation of a novel coronavirus. Or it can be as large as 5 microns, 5 times the size of the largest novel coronavirus, and just a little smaller than the active ingredient in the riot agent tear gas, or CS gas, that is used by law enforcement. So tuberculosis is pretty large, just like a novel coronavirus. Especially if just 6 times smaller than the active ingredient in tear gas. And under normal conditions, not long after being expelled, gravity would make it fall to the ground pretty fast after being propelled, especially its largest form. But what makes it an aerosol transmission risk is that low infectious dose required to infect a person. So that it only needs to be suspended in the air for just a little while. And then that small dose could pose a risk to someone. Just a dab will do you, Jack Nicholson says. Perhaps this requires a political solution. We cannot say, confirm, nor deny. This briefing was unclassified. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board. Let's keep Mike Webb away from our schools. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Thank you.